J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bonjour tout le monde.
I now call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. We are back on meeting 145 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table with respect to the sound system. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to help protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially our interpreters. A reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of our interpreters, that is very important that your microphones be muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you all for your collaboration.
Comments should be addressed through the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is continuing its study on Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, of the 2024 reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
Before I introduce our witnesses, I understand that Mr. Erskine-Smith, you'd like the floor for just a few minutes, please. Over to you.
Thanks, John. As you'll recall, at our last meeting, things got quite heated with me and my Conservative colleague from South Shore St. Margaret's. I'll be brief, but I would like to speak to that. I want to first say, in the former Conservative leader's last speech in the House, he raised concerns about performance politics fueling polarization and too many politicians chasing algorithms, clicks, and likes towards diversion and division. And I want to be clear, there's no place in the House at committee for personal and unwarranted attacks on a member's integrity, their work ethic, or ability to exercise independence, which I would note I've exercised on countless occasions since I was elected in 2015. One shouldn't chase likes if it means embracing character assassination. It's toxic, it's unparliamentary, and it's going to push good people out of our politics, and we should call that behavior out. At the same time, I could and should have used parliamentary language in calling out that behavior, because instead of contributing to a solution, I missed the mark, and I retract those comments. We should all act how we want this place to be. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. I do appreciate those comments. I'll now turn to our witnesses from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Conrad von Finkenstein. Commissioner, good to see you again, sir. And Michael Aquilino, Legal Counsel. Mr. von Finkenstein, you'll be given 5 minutes for an opening remarks. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Does the microphone work? I was told to do a test so that the interpreters can understand me. I gather it works. Okay.
I'm getting
Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. With me is Michael Aquilino, Legal Counsel at the office. The subject of today's meeting is the Auditor General's Report 6, which looks at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. It is about a performance audit conducted under the Auditor General Act.
This is the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons. The Commissioner's Office helps members in the public office holders.
Mr. von Finkenstein, just 1 second. Some members are having some trouble with the interpretation. Ms. Yip, can you hear me? Madame Yip, est-ce que tu peux m'entendre en anglais?
Ms. Yip, can you hear me on the English channel? Is it working on the English channel now, or French? This is the English channel. This is the interpreter on the English channel. The interpreter on the English channel. This is the interpreter on the English channel. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. This is the interpreter on the English channel. This is the interpreter on the English channel.
Sort out Ms. Yip's earpiece here. She's having some trouble. So, Ms. Yip, est-ce que ça marche maintenant?
Is it working now?
You hear me in English. Okay. Est-ce que vous m'entendez en anglais maintenant?
Do you hear me in English or in French at the moment? This is the English channel. Is it working now? This is the English channel. Ms. Yip does not have interpretation.
Speaking in French.
Ça marche ici?
It's working here. It's working. Yes, this is the English channel. Yes, everything's going well, says the chair. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. Yes, so now it's working. Ms. Yip, is it working? Ms. Yip, is it working? This is the English channel.
Commissioner, you have the floor, and you're welcome to back up and start wherever.
On previous occasion, you gave me an extra long microphone, so this doesn't happen. Maybe we can dig out that extra long microphone.
The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. We administer the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons. The Commissioner's Office helps members and the public office holders, i.e. people appointed to their position by the Governor and Council, to prevent, to manage conflict of interests. On occasion, when necessary, we also investigate. Monsieur Michael Barrett, Député de Leeds.
Mr. Michael Barrett, Member of Parliament for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, asked me to investigate two members of SDTC's Board of Directors. One was Annette Verschuren, former chairperson of SDTC. The other was Guy Ouimet, a former director of SDTC. The SDTC board had 15 members. Of those, Ms. Verschuren and Mr. Ouimet were among 7 directors who were appointed by the Governor and Council.
They were, as Order and Council appointments, they were subject to the Act as public office holders. Unlike reporting public office holder, this category of people is subject to the Act, but they do not give the Commissioner's Office any personal financial information on appointment. Neither do they have to make any declarations. We do not assign advisors to them, but we are available should they have problems and want to contact us. The other 8 members of the board were appointed by SDTC's member council, so they are not covered by this act. En juillet 2020,
In July 2024, I reported on the Verschuren and Ouimet investigations. I found that Ms. Verschuren failed to comply with the Act's provisions on decision-making and recusal. Those lapses were based on a misunderstanding of the difference between abstaining and recusing and on incorrect legal advice.
there was an information gap about refusals. The office has therefore since addressed this gap by issuing an information notice that can be found on our website. In short, recusal is more than staying silent during a discussion or refraining from voting. Public office holders must leave the room, virtually or physically, so that their mere presence cannot influence other parties. À la différence.
Unlike the Auditor General, the Commissioner's Office does not look at any conduct other than conflict of interests. In the case of SDTC, our scope is limited to the rules of the Conflict of Interest Act insofar as they apply to individuals appointed to their positions by the Governor and Council.
No comment to make on the alleged conflict of interest of individuals not appointed by the Governor and Council or any other issue of alleged malfeasance mentioned by the Auditor General. That's not part of my remit. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll open things up with Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. von Finkenstein, your report in which you found Ms. Verschuren guilty of breaking the law by violating the Conflict of Interest Act merely scratches the surface of corruption and conflict at the Green Slush Fund. The Auditor General identified 186 conflicts of interest involving board members involving $330 million taxpayer dollars. When you appeared at the Industry Committee last month, you were asked by Mr. Perkins if you were going to initiate investigations into these many other conflicts of interest. You indicated that you had not. You further said as a rationale, quote, when they are no longer in office, what good does it serve to expose them, closed quote. And you just said in concluding your remarks that this is not part of your mandate. So I put it to you, why are you not taking steps to look into these other 186 conflicts of interest, which did involve potentially board members who were appointed by way of order in council?
Well, first of all, none of the order and council appointees is there any longer, was in place at the time I made my final report. Secondly, as you know, my remit is basically conflict of interest, and all I can do is expose it. I cannot penalize people. I cannot ask for repayment of funds or anything like that. The allegations in the office of the Auditor General's report are indeed shocking and very numerous, etc. But they really do not concern what I am in charge with, which is to expose conflicts of interest.
Well, Mr. von Finkenstein, I appreciate that, and you are right. Your mandate is to expose conflicts of interest. And you said, when you were pressed by Mr. Perkins at Industry Committee, that just because someone was a former board member or a former Order in Council appointee, that doesn't preclude you from initiating an investigation, correct? And so, while it is true that these are now former board members, when you talk about exposing, I would submit that that's all the more reason why I would think it would be appropriate for you to make queries about these 186 conflicts of interest, which you just said were shocking in terms of what was revealed in the Auditor General's report. I mean, to that end, what about accountability? What about transparency? What about shining a light on wrongdoing on the part of former board members? Again, $330 million taxpayer dollars.
I think the Auditor General has done exactly what you're asking for. She has exposed the workings, she has exposed conflicts, she has exposed issues where there's self-serving or log rolling, etc. It is quite a damning report. But if I now exercise my discretion, which it is, to launch an investigation against one of these people, for instance,
well, sir,
what could I do?
Well,
I would.
Well, sir, maybe I'll ask you this: have you contacted the Auditor General to inquire into the particulars of the 186 conflicts of interest involving former Green Slush Fund board members identified in her report?
Look, the Auditor General has a job. She has what she does, and she has access to all sorts of confidential information, which she guards. But then on that basis, she makes her report.
Sure, but again, my time is limited, and I'm asking you, have you made any inquiries of the Auditor General to better understand the particulars of those conflicts? Because they're not in any way they're discussed in the Auditor General's report in broad terms, but not every conflict of interest is equal. Some may be more egregious than others, and where there was impropriety, there would seem to me to be an expectation that there is accountability, including calling out those who violated the Conflict of Interest Act potentially blatantly, because there were 90 instances identified in the report in which board members did not recuse themselves, notwithstanding potentially having interests in companies in which money was funneled into those companies. So again, have you contacted the Auditor General?
If you were a member of the STDC, and your reputation by now would be damaged. You clearly were part of this whole organization and the behavior that was exposed by the Auditor General. My report.
So the answer, sir, with respect, the answer is no.
If you let me finish
if
you let me finish one sentence, I'd gladly answer, but I cannot answer you if you keep interrupting me. You asked me, and I'm pointing out the damage is done through the Auditor General. Now, you want to have an answer specifically as to what we contacted the Auditor General about. My colleague Michael will answer you.
Well, the simple answer is no. We don't communicate with other agents of Parliament to discuss operational matters.
Let me just say, with the greatest of respect, Mr. von Finkenstein, and I do have respect for you and the office that you hold, but I find it surprising and disappointing that you would simply say, it's not within my purview, I have no interest in looking at this further to identify or get to the bottom of any of these further additional 186 conflicts of interest involving $330 million taxpayer dollars. It seems to me that 186 conflicts of interest involving that amount of money should have the full attention of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. von Finkenstein, if you have a response to that, I'll certainly allow it.
Well, a conflict of interest doesn't necessarily mean a conflict of interest under the Act, first of all. You'd have to go through each one of those to see. Secondly, as I pointed out, it's my discretion to launch an investigation or not. I launch it if I think it has an effect and is needed. In this case, I'm of the view that the Auditor General has made a very lengthy report. It exposed all sorts of malfeasance by the corporations, its operations, etc. I think my making an investigation of any of the board members would merely basically substantiate what the Auditor General already said, and I don't think it is worth my time or the time of the use of public money. The fact is that all I can do is expose. I cannot penalize. I cannot recuperate.
Thank you, Mr. von Finkenstein. Next is Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of the witnesses for appearing today. Just for the benefit of people that may be watching from home, I just want to reiterate that, Mr. Finkenstein, you've already appeared before this committee on this subject and at INDU, both within the last 2 months, so you're quite familiar with this process and the topic.
I believe Mr. von Finkenstein was here previously on the ArriveCAN. This is his first time on this one. He has been here, but yes, it
did devolve into this topic as well.
Yes, okay, that's, anyway, I did stop the clock. I just wanted to be clear on that, so Mr. von Finkenstein wasn't.
Right. That's not why he was called, but it did devolve into that. You're correct. So since your last appearance at this committee, we've heard from 2 members of the new SDTC board, Ms. Morgan and Ms. Doyle. Both have stated that they met with you as part of their appointment process. Can you confirm you met with the 3 new members of the board responsible for the transition of SDTC into the NRC?
You're talking about the new board. You're talking about the 3 new Martha members. Morgan, Paul Booth, and Cassie Doyle?
Yes.
I had one conversation with Mr. Booth. I have not talked to the other 2. However, they asked for a presentation of my office on the Conflict of Interest Act, how it works and how it applies to Zoo, and we gave them that presentation.
Okay, so you didn't meet with either Ms. Morgan or Ms. Doyle?
No.
Okay. Could you expand on the conversation you had with the 3rd member then?
That was prior to appointment. He basically asked me about what the Act involved and what would be the obligations. And I gave him a very short cursory because I didn't know whether he was going to appoint it or not, whether he wanted to. In effect, he, like any responsible person before taking a new job, he wanted to know what is involved and what it is. And I pointed out to him that the biggest issue which he would be facing is whether he had any assets which would prevent him from taking it, or whether any previous activity that he had could be considered a conflict, etc. And he obviously had to make the decision. He seemed to be quite, how should I say, not at all worried about anything I said, because he's a retired public servant, and he didn't think he had any assets, and his activities did not involve SCDC. So he did, but it's his decision to make. All I can do is to outline it to him. Well, if you'd accept this job, this is the kind of regime you will be under.
So just to confirm, then, you haven't met with any of the 3 of them post their appointment to the board?
No, I have not.
So the members that we've had before committee, Ms. Morgan and Ms. Doyle, stated that they are not conflicted, that they have no conflicts with any company or organization within the clean tech sector. Can you speak to this?
It is up to them to decide. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, they are subject to the Act, but because they are only public officers, not reporting public officers, it is up to them to inquire or to familiarize themselves with the Act and act in accordance to it. If it's a part of reporting public office holder or a member of parliament like yourself, then, as you know, you have to make a declaration upon this, you have to annually update it, and there's a person designated to look after you whom you can talk to any time. And so that doesn't apply to public office holders. Public office holders, just basically, you're subject to the Act, here's the Act, We write them a letter. You're now appointed. You're subject to the act. Here's a copy of the act. And if you have any problem, contact us. It's up to them to decide whether they have a conflict and whether they want to consult us or not.
Okay. Now, we've learned that SDTC has already implemented 11 of the 12 AG recommendations and is in the process of implementing the final one, which is a project review, reviewing the projects from an eligibility and conflict of interest standpoint. SDTC has sought advice from multiple third-party firms as part of this process. They've been clear where any wrongdoing or fraud on the part of a company would lead to the recouping of funds. I'm wondering, do you have any comments or thoughts on this process?
No, I think that indeed there should be recoupment of funds if there has been involved fraud, or a breach of the act. But that's not my remit. That falls really under the Commissioner of the Public Service Integrity. My sole duty is to make sure that people do not get into conflict, or if they have a conflict, they manage it in such a way that they are in compliance with the act, and obviously investigate if there should be alleged breaches.
Now, during your last appearance before this committee, one of my colleagues filled you in on a letter by the RCMP Commissioner to the House Clerk on the Conservative House motion adopted on June the 10th, 2024. With this letter, the RCMP Commissioner sounded the alarm, saying that this House order is interfering in operational and police independence. The Auditor General has also come out saying that this motion would compromise her independence and has refused to abide by it. You've previously stated just how vital independence is to the functioning of such offices, such as yours or that of the AG, that your roles and continued credibility are a function of this independence. I wonder do you have any further comments to make on this?
No, as I said before, another committee, we have two different principles here which are very difficult to reconcile. One of them is the principle of independence and confidentiality, etc. The other one is when you do a prosecution and you bring people before court and you try to convict them, you have to show that the evidence that you obtained is a clean source of evidence, and here it is evidence that is credible and you obtained it legitimately, etc. Now, in this case, where documents are forced to be disclosed to the RCMP, they haven't had a warrant to use, etc. Undoubtedly, in a prosecution, there will be some objections raised, and somebody will say, no, there was a violation of the Charter of Rights because these documents weren't obtained by a warrant. And the court will then have to decide how you reconcile these two principles. The principle of Parliament is supreme and can order whatever it wants, and on the other hand, we shall have a Charter of Right to protect citizens against unlawful conduct by authorities.
Thank you. That is the time, I'm afraid, Ms. Bradford. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us this morning. Mr. Aquilino, thank you also. My first question would be to briefly recap, please, since my time is limited, how the process works in terms of how you decide who will be investigated. For example, as we know for SDTC, you provided reports on Ms. Verschuren and Mr. Ouimet. Were there others? What's the process? Is it only when it's pointed out to you or requested by members or others? Do you decide by yourself? Well, there are two ways. A member of Parliament can ask for an investigation, in which case I will examine the issue, and if I find that there's enough substance there for an investigation, I will proceed. I also have the discretion to begin an investigation because of what I hear in the media or on the radio, in newspapers, and information that I obtain or that is provided to me. But each time, the test is the same. Each time I must decide.
Yes. Les commissaires peuvent étudier la question de son.
The commissioner may proceed with an investigation of his own, out of his own discretion, if a public office holder has gone against any of the principles. I have to see whether there are grounds, if there are reasons to believe that there was some kind of contravention. If
Leave. Okay, c'est le test.
Motive.
that would be the English. Yes, so I must apply that each time before proceeding. But in the case of SDTC, are you able to, or are you currently investigating other board members who were involved in this? As I answered when your colleague asked, my only power is to expose conflicts of interest. The Auditor General has already done that in her report. I conducted a special investigation on Ms. Verscher and Mr. Ouimet. But the others who have been found to have conflicts of interest have already been exposed by the Auditor General in her report. So I don't see what additional value an investigation by my office would provide. Well, for the simple reason that you are looking specifically at conflicts of interest, whereas the Auditor General looks at how the fund is managed, whether the way the funding was managed goes against the original purpose, and so on. If you're specified, or if you rather specialize in conflicts of interest, well, there are many other members of the board who may have potential conflicts of interest that would be relevant for your office, and I think it would be important for you to investigate the other members. I have a question and a suggestion on that. Can you look only at appointed members, or can you really examine the actions of public servants? No, I have no jurisdiction over members of the public service, only those appointed by the government. There are 8 ministers who are not appointed by government, and I cannot open any kind of investigation. Of the members here, of the board members, I looked at 2 of the 8, and I provided a report. And so you are not intending to go ahead with an investigation on the others? No. As I mentioned earlier, I don't see what that would add to the discussion. We know there have been conflicts of interest that has already been shown by the Auditor General. I mean, what would the consequences be? Is there fraud, anything like that? That's not under my remit. But the Auditor General didn't push that far for some of the conflicts of interest. She simply identified them, said that there was appearance of conflict of interest, but an investigation would be useful. I'll repeat it. I really believe that there are members of the board who have been targeted and identified as having conflicts of interest. And through their businesses, they made money off of public funds. I think that's very important to look into. Your investigations on these 2 board members were very useful, and we're using them in committee, and we could get more. We could use more information on the other board members, because we have the list of the 90 conflicts of interest. We have names that come up over and over again. For example, Méthode. So with the allegations we're hearing, would it not be relevant and necessary for the ethics commissioner or of conflicts of interest rather, be really able to tell what happened based, as you said, on what the previous board members have stated, but, to go deeper into the issue, because it's not the role of the Auditor General to really delve into conflicts of interest. She identified a few, but you are the one who can go deeper and tell us more about those. Well, first, André-Lise Méthode was not appointed. No. I will leave the commissioner finish because your time is up. Mr. von Finkstein, you have the floor. The Auditor General identified the cases of conflict of interest. She already exposed those who were in conflict of interest. It's the same thing I can do. In my opinion, which is not the same as yours, I don't see the point in conducting my own investigation.
Mr. Canning, it's good to see you for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. I think one of the main tasks of this committee and others is to make sure when we are presented with what was clearly an incredibly, as the Auditor General found it, a dramatic case of conflict of interest on multiple fronts. One of the main things that we have to look to here is how do we stop this from happening again? And I was a bit surprised when you mentioned that, there are the 7 members, I think, that are appointed by Governor and Council that are subject to the Conflict of Interest Act, but you don't get information from those people when they're appointed. They're not required to report, as MPs and others are. Is there any form even of orientation? I used to be on a couple of administrative tribunals. When I took those positions, I was given training on what conflict of interest is, how do you test for it, when should you recuse yourself. Is there any orientation at all for those board members?
Well, I presume. Okay, normally it's the corporate counsel who does that. You get appointed to a board. He would appoint you. He would give you a briefing, etc. In this case, where it's a government body and the members are public officers, if they ask for, we'll give them a briefing. We'll explain it to them, as they have done. In the new board, the 3 members have asked for a briefing, and we've given that, etc. But they were appointed as public officers. It's the government's choice to make them public office holders or reporting public office holders. If they decided that this organization is so important, and what they deal with a lot of money, they have a lot of discretion, etc. We want to put the highest kind of discipline on them. They could designate them as reporting public office holders, in which case, like you as an MP, they would have to have a disclosure, they would have a special counselor, and we would monitor them each year, and they would have had to report it. The downside to that is, of course, that you want to have people who know something about sustaining development technology, who have other interests and not. And therefore, I assume, I have no idea why the government has chosen to right now we have a different board, but they originally chose to have a board that's half nominated by the government and half by this council. But even those that are nominated by the government, like Madame Verschuren, etc., is up to them to make sure they don't have to be as closely monitored as reporting public office holders.
Yeah, okay. Now, as we all know, the SDTC is only now temporarily at NRC and will eventually become, at least according to plans, part of the Canada Innovation Corporation. The act, creating that corporation has passed, but it isn't in force. And under that act, it says the guidelines respecting conflicts of interest must be consistent with sections 116 and 117 of the Financial Administration Act. Can you explain what those sections are, and will they have any bearing on how we can prevent this from happening in the future?
If they are part of the Canada Innovation Foundation, it's the same rules apply as applied here, that they are public office holders. They are not reporting public office holders.
So this is just repeating the situation that we're dealing with right now.
There's nothing preventing for the government from making them reporting public office holders. They have the authority. Michael, you explain it to him, please.
So often, the decision on making an individual a reporting public office holder or a simple public office holder is based on their role. Oftentimes, public office holders would be part-time appointees. But there is a provision in the Act, which is what the Commissioner was trying to allude to, where the Governor and Council can designate certain public office holders or even certain non-public office holders, get them into the ambit of the Act as well. So the Governor and Council does have that power to designate certain officials and change their reporting status as well.
How much time?
You have 45 seconds.
45 seconds. So this will, I just want to be clear, this doesn't change anything about what SDTC would be in the future. They would be in the same position in terms of their board members.
If they operate at a part-time basis, they'll most likely remain public office holders unless they are designated otherwise.
Right.
Thank you very much. I'm going to begin the second round now. It is my intention to get through it fully since this was an important witness we have here today. So beginning with Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our witnesses for joining us here this morning. Commissioner, I want to begin with the Verschaeren report, which you obviously undertook and provided a thorough analysis of some of the challenges that were discovered with Ms. Verschaeren and her work at SDTC. I wanted to highlight a few sentences that were found at paragraph 151 of your report. And you wrote, and I'm going to quote it, "In reality, the entire approval process for seed funding was flawed. The evidence shows that decisions regarding seed funding had essentially already been made at earlier stages, and the board's final approval was automatic since decisions were made by consensus, and seed funding, in any event, was included in the consent agenda. Thus, an abstention, especially a partial one in respect of particular projects contained within a single agenda item, had no impact on the outcome for those projects." So effectively, to paraphrase, these decisions were already made by the time Ms. Verschaeren recused herself or abstained, and that simple act at the end actually didn't do anything to negate the conflict of interest, because the entire process leading up to that, she would have been conflicted in. Am I correct in that interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, proper corporate behavior would have been to take it out of the consent agenda. If a member comes and says, I have a conflict with Company X, then okay, Company X, you take it out of the consent agenda, deal with the consent agenda minus Company X, and then deal with Company X, and she has to recuse herself and leave the room. That would have been the proper way. Here, they follow this rather strange procedure saying, I have a conflict. Okay, noted. Yeah, consent agenda number 1. Everybody agreed? Yes, done. Well, including her. You know, this doesn't make sense. You know, if you abstain, which you can't, the Act has no provision for it, but anyway, if you obviously want to indicate your conflict, then you shouldn't be involved. You should actually leave the room. That wasn't followed, and that's what this sentence that you cite is trying to drive at.
And so that effectively would apply to all board members and not just for Ms. Verschaeren, that anyone who would have had a conflict would have been in that same boat in which it's simply being agreed, you know, here we are, there's all these things, we're conflicted, but here we are. Is that effectively any of the board members who had a conflict would have been in that same spot? They were effectively just giving a wink and a nod and things were being approved?
I don't know about the wink and the nod, but they effectively, yes, it applied not only to Ms. Verschaeren, but anybody who was in the same position.
I wanted to kind of back up from the specific issue in terms of your investigation and how you came to some of these analysis or these outcomes. Were you provided with copies of minutes and discussions that led up to some of these final decisions? Were you provided with all the information that you can make these analysis leading up to these final decisions?
Under the Act, we have the power to ask for any kind of document which we do. It's like a subpoena ducis tecum. If you're a lawyer, it means a subpoena to bring the relevant documents. And then you come personally with counsel, you're put under oath, and you testify under oath as to what's happened, and you can have reference to the documents.
One of the things that our committee has done is we've passed a motion requesting certain documents. One of the motions was the minutes of all meetings of the selection committee that considered the appointment of the chair of the board, the same chair, obviously, that you found in a conflict of interest. Interestingly, the PCO came back and told us that no such records exist, and since they were considered transitory in nature and disposed of once the appointment is made, disposed of obviously disappeared in some way, whether they were deleted or just never filed formally. Would you have had access to any of those appointment considerations when Ms. Verschaeren was initially appointed?
When there is a question of documents which are held by Privy Council, and we ask for them, in some instances Privy Council will say there's a prerogative here, but which are all prerogative, we do not have to disclose, etc. And this always becomes a sensitive issue. We have never taken it, had never had to take it to court. We've always managed to resolve these issues of conflict. They, of course, feel very strongly about some documents and want to preserve their confidence. We obviously want to have go to the bottom of the situation, and so it gets sometimes tense discussions, but they've always been resolved.
Thank you very much. Next up is Ms. Yip. For 5 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you to both of you for coming this morning. So you mentioned in your opening statement, when it is necessary, the Ethics Commissioner Office will investigate. What is the tipping point of when you would start an investigation?
Well, 2 reasons. Number one, I'm asked to investigate something by a member of the House of Commons. I have no choice. I have to do that. I look at it, but I do what we call an exam. We look at the situation and say, is there enough? Is this just an allegation or a rumor or something, or is there some substance enough to have reason to believe that there has been a breach of the Act? If so, then we start an investigation. If we don't have reason to believe, then we don't. If it's on my own initiative, the same test applies. If somebody writes to me, or I see something in the paper, or on the news, etc., and it looks like this is suspicious, then we may start a sort of preliminary look at it and see is there enough, and ask for some documents from the relevant person or so. And then on that basis, we make the decision, yes or no, this warrants a deeper investigation, or no, there's really nothing here. This is a bit of a vapor produced by the media.
Okay. So you don't always need a request from members. It can be anyone.
Yeah. It's not a request. If somebody writes me from the public, I don't have to act at all on it, but basically, of course, I will look at it. And this, as I say, there has to be reason to believe there has to be a contravention of the Act. If there isn't, then we don't go any further.
Okay. What are the dangers of an uncredible Office of the Auditor General and Ethics Commissioner?
An uncredible? Well, I mean, the whole system is based on integrity of government. And the Auditor General's job, the same as mine, the same as the Commissioner of Public Sector Integrity, is to ensure that the government works with integrity, that the rules are respected, and there's no self-serving, etc. If we don't do that if people can't believe in what we say, or if our reports are not based on fact or something. And the whole exercise is for the birds, and basically it just increases the lack of faith that some people have in the government. We were very careful when we do that everything is substantiated. We want to demonstrate it. We have no interest in the outcome. It's not indifferent to me personally. It's a job I have to do. I have to find out, has there been a violation, and if so, expose it, so etc. But also at the same time, I want to have to be very careful that I don't hurt somebody's reputation by relying on facts that can't be proved, or on things that are said or issued with ulterior motives, but really do not have a bearing on the issue in question.
Well, I appreciate your clear statements in your opening remarks. What are the dangers to a tainted police in this country, given the legislative branch's incursion in its independent processes?
Well, you're now alluding to what you had before. But the problem is the documents that you have asked for and sent to the RCMP, if they use them or something like that, to what extent will that interfere with subsequent prosecutions of a person, and to what extent are those documents obtained in violation of the Charter of Rights? And that's an issue, which nobody knows what the answer is. Undoubtedly, the issue will come before the courts at one point in time, and they'll have to decide in a Solomonic way how to reconcile these two principles, the principle of supremacy of Parliament and the principles set out in the Charter of Rights.
Okay.
Very brief if you have a question, and if you don't, you'll keep us on time. So over to you.
Just keep us on time.
All right, perfect then.
Thank you.
And your side will have another opportunity, of course. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Degagné pour 2 minutes.
Next is Ms. Sinclair Degagné for just 2.5 minutes, please. Commissioner, when you drafted the Verschuren report, you stated that there was a breach of the conflict of interest code because of the business, Ms. Verschuren's business. Now, the Auditor General identified over a dozen conflicts of interest with other businesses. What happened with them? Did you look at them, or no? Well, we looked at each decision, each vote taken by Ms. Verschuren when she was on the board of the SDTC. And we didn't compare it with every business for every decision. So in this context, since the Auditor General identified the list and had provided it to the committee, did you see that list? If you looked at all the meeting minutes and so on, you did basically the same thing that the Auditor General did? Did you compare your results? No, we didn't compare our results to see whether our numbers were the same, but we went back to the primary sources that we had available in our investigation. We did our own count, looked at each vote and the results. Sometimes she declared a conflict of interest and abstained instead of recusing herself. Sometimes she declared it but still voted, and so on. So we counted all of those cases. And in the other cases, there was nothing as flagrant as for Enerstor. Well, what we said was that there were systemic problems, and that's what the commissioner concluded in his report. For example, for the COVID vote, all the board members took the same advice, and it was erroneous advice, legal advice. So to come back to what the commissioner was saying, how useful is it to have subsequent investigations on the same topic, in his opinion, mine also? It wouldn't get us any further in exposing these systemic problems, because these problems were the same for all the members. But on our end, if it's been identified that a board member lacked judgment at minimum and potentially made money it would be good to have a study that shows it, but at the same time, we know that the RCMP has started its own investigation. So that will all on my end. Thank you.
Up next is Mr. Cannings again. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Okay, I'd just like to continue with, this theme of how do we stop this from happening in the future. I'm imagining that these directors knew about what conflict of interest is. And if not, I think there should be some sort of mandatory orientation to instruct them on what it is and I guess some rules around when they have to recuse themselves in terms of different scenarios.
The SCDC has a very elaborate code of conduct by itself, which made reference to the Conflict of Interest Act. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. The code was well set out, it was clear, etc. I'll ask Michael to see whether there was any, if we have any evidence that they had training on it or not. But it was given to them when they were appointed. And we also, like everybody who's appointed, we write to them, say, you are now subject to the Act, and here's a copy of the Act. Was there, Michael, do we have any evidence if there was any training by inside STDC?
Well, it wasn't set out in the report. I would assume no, but the interesting thing that is set out in the report is that their own policy set out the correct standard, the standard to recuse in such instances, which they didn't follow.
You see, the problem here was that they really got very bad legal advice. Right. And then they followed the legal advice rather than looking at the code, which said quite correctly what they had to do.
I mean, just again, as MPs, we're reporting officers or whatever, so we have to report annually, but also the first day that you come in for orientation here, you are sat down and the legal people go over with you various things about conflict of interest and what will put you in jail. And it's very much emphasized. And I'm just wondering if that was not done here, or what, you say in writing their policies were good, but they either just ignored them or weren't aware.
Mr. Kangs, we didn't examine the internal educational policy of CDC, so I cannot speak to it. I can only assume, like any other corporate body, when you have new directors, the corporate council sits down with them and tells them what their obligations are and gets them to sign a piece of paper saying that they read the code and they will abide by it.
Thank you.
But as I say, I'm surmising. I don't have any.
Thank you. That is the time. Going back to Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to probe your findings in the UMAT report. You undertook an investigation into Green Slush Fund board member Guy Ouimet. You looked more specifically into allegations of conflict of interest when Mr. Ouimet voted along with the rest of the board to approve $38.5 million in taxpayer dollars in so-called COVID relief payments, $38.5 million that the Auditor General determined improperly went out the door. At issue with Mr. Ouimet is that he had a 1% interest in a company called Lithion, a company that received nearly $400,000 from the COVID relief payments that Mr. Ouimet improperly voted to approve. You found that Mr. Ouimet had a financial interest when he voted to approve this funding, correct?
Yeah.
And you found that when Mr. Ouimet participated in and voted to approve the so-called COVID relief payments, he knew that Lithion, a company that he had an interest in, would benefit, correct?
Yes.
And therefore, he had a private interest in those decisions, right?
Correct.
And as a result, it was your conclusion that Mr. Ouimet's conduct fell short of the Conflict of Interest Act, more specifically Sections 6 and 21, which taken together require a public office holder such as Mr. Ouimet to recuse themselves on matters in which they have a conflict of interest. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Nonetheless, you dismissed the allegations against Mr. Ouimet on the basis of the principle of de minimis, that his 1% interest in Lithion was of a trivial nature, and that's at paragraph 144 of your report. Did you ask Mr. Ouimet the dollar value of his 1% interest in Lithion?
Michael, can you answer?
Yeah, it was $1,200 interest.
That's correct. It was $1,200 at the time, but in 3 short years after Mr. Ouimet voted to funnel nearly $400,000 from the Green Slush Fund into Lithion, his 1% interest in Lithion has increased by nearly 900%. It went from $1,250 to $11,000. That's quite a return, wouldn't you say?
Well, let's start at the beginning. Mr. Ouimet, like everybody else, voted on the COVID. It was a voting, 2 votes which were taken, and at the time there was absolutely no reference to conflict of interest at all, because the advice from corporate counsel, who was at not corporate, what's it called? Reporting counsel says there was no need.
I don't want to interrupt you, but bad legal advice doesn't excuse one from following the Conflict of Interest Act.
Did I say it did?
Well, you were alluding to bad legal advice.
I'm trying to give an answer. So everybody gave who voted on that was in. If they had a conflict, was in conflict. Mr. Ouimet's conflict. Interest was in this tiny little sliver of a company. And, you know, I don't know.
Well, I just find it interesting that you looked at $1,250, but you didn't look at the fact that it increased by 900% in value. After he votes to funnel $400,000 to a company that he had an interest in, he knew he had an interest in it at the time, and all of a sudden, his so-called trivial 1% interest increases nearly 900%. How is a conflict of interest that is a conflict of interest that is too small to matter? Because it is a fact that Mr. Ouimet, with the greatest of respect, profited handsomely in part because of his conflicts of interest at the Green Slush Fund.
He had a 1% interest. He could have lost that 1% interest, or the vote was not on his 1% interest. The vote was on a number of companies, all the companies that SDTC until that point had supported, and did they need an emergency funding before COVID? He, like all the others, voted. As I've said in my report, it was totally wrong.
He voted to funnel $400,000 into a company that he
voted
had an
for
interest
his 1%.
in, and he profited handsomely from that. And I would submit that isn't a trivial matter.
Yes, just 1 second, Mr. Von Pinkston. Mr. Von Pinkston, just 1 second. I do have a point of order from Mr. Drouin.
I'm having a hard time listening who's up, and I know it's the members' time. I respect that, but obviously we need to hear from the witnesses as well.
Very good. Yes, the members can avoid speaking over themselves. So what I'm going to do before Mr. Von Finkenstein, I'm going to see, Mr. Cooper, you've got about 15 seconds left. So do you have a further follow-up? All right. Mr. Von Finkenstein, the floor is yours, and that will lead us into our next member after. You have the floor, please.
At best, you can say that he voted to save the $1,200 that he had invested. That was at stake at the time he made his vote. And I found that was so trivial it didn't work. The principle of the minimis non iura peta applied. That was at issue for him at the time he took the vote. Subsequent events, as you point out, it turned out to be positive. It could have been negative, etc. I have no idea, and that was not the issue. The issue was what was at stake for him at the point in time he took the vote, and that was $1,200.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Drouin pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Drouin for 5 minutes.
We've changed our minds since then, so Mr. Erskine Smith will be going.
Very good. Mr. Erskine Smith, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, John. The last back and forth is instructive, actually, because you have the conflict of interest commissioner saying this is de minimis. It's a $1,200 stake, a 1% stake in a company that itself is one of 63 companies that are being funded in a bundle package in the midst of COVID. And you've got a conservative member saying how dare you find this to be de minimis, this green slush fund? And I want to pick up from that because green slush fund, I hear that language and it sounds like bribery, embezzlement. It sounds like fraud. It sounds like there's something criminal there. And there were 90 conflicts of interest identified by the Auditor General where processes were not followed. In 96 cases they were followed, 90 cases they weren't followed. That's damning on its own, as you've said, that in almost half of the cases, the policies were not appropriately followed. 63 of those cases were actually those COVID votes. You've done a proper report with respect to the Ms. Verschuren. You found 2 ethics violations. You did a proper report for Mr. Ouimet. You found that there was an ethics violation, but it was so de minimis that it was not of sufficient concern. For the Canadian public who's followed these proceedings in passing and has heard language, criminal accusations, language around Green Slush Fund, you've looked at this. You've looked at this in detail. You've got the expertise. Is there any reason to think that there was criminal conduct here?
No. If there had been any reason for me to believe that it was criminal conduct, I would have immediately stopped my investigation and referred the matter to the RCMP. I'm obliged to do that by the Act.
Nothing that you've seen in all of your review of documents, your interviewing of witnesses, going down. First, the Auditor General does the work, and then you're pursuing this further. Not a single piece of evidence, not a single bit of testimony has caused you to pause and say, maybe I should refer this matter to the RCMP.
No, nothing. I mean, I listened to the examination of both Mr. Verschuren and Mr. Ouimet in entirety, and there, in order to, which I always do, in order to get sort of a feeling for an assessment of the veracity of what they're doing, the credibility of what they're saying. And it was clear to me that this was a fund that was, let's be kind, sloppily organized and operated. But there was nothing illegal from the evidence that I was presented to that would have said, hey, I should stop right now and refer to the RCMP.
Well, let's look at the jurisdiction for which you're responsible, conflicts of interest, because the Auditor General identifies those 90 cases. And I want to go into the details a little bit here, because you've got 63 cases that have to do with that bundle, two votes around COVID bundling payments. It's relatively straightforward what happened here. You've articulated this, and just so I've got this clear, this was a lawyer at Osler who was reporting counsel who gave advice to the board to say, you've already declared these conflicts or we've managed these conflicts, you don't have to redeclare them, and you can vote as a bundle payment without further declaring conflicts on this matter. Bad advice. Obviously, you've said it was incorrect legal advice. You are right. The Auditor General's right. But that's what happened? It was bad legal advice that they were following.
Yeah, I mean, these votes came up because nobody talked about conflict of interest. We examined both Mrs. Verschuren and the legal counsel, etc., and they said, no, we didn't come up. And I said, why wasn't raised, etc., and I was told, he said, on the basis of my general knowledge of corporate law, I didn't think it was necessary.
Gotcha. And I want to get to the 25 cases, because we've got 63 cases of those 90 that were the COVID bundle payments. You've got 2 cases which relate to an external expert reviewer where the individual should not have been involved. But with respect to the board, you've got 25 additional cases where directors participated in discussions and voted to approve, according to the Auditor General, for funding despite having previously declared a conflict. Now, half of those directors, according to the Auditor General, have said, well, no, there was no further conflict, or that they did in fact recuse themselves. With respect to those 25 cases, should Canadians have any concern? You've obviously found 2 ethics violations with Ms. Verschuren. Should Canadians have concern in those 25 cases that there was anything that anything warrants further investigation?
Look, if these 25 allegations of conflict of interest resulted in enrichment or in fraud or something like this, it obviously should be investigated and should be dealt with. Fortunately, it's not my mandate. You know, I have no powers to do that. We have a commissioner of public service sector integrity, and we have the RCMP, who are both looking at this. I don't, you know, this is unfortunately the way Parliament has seen fit to the different sectors, right? I'm conflict of interest. She is in public sector integrity, i.e. misuse of money and fraud. The RCMP is to deal with criminal violations. we don't overlap and we respect each other's jurisdiction, and we have to. And if I see something that belongs there, I will notify them and stop my investigation.
Thank you. That is the time.
Thanks very much.
I'm afraid. I want to thank you for your testimony today and for coming in today, gentlemen, and participating in relation to Study 6 SDTC. I'll now suspend for a few minutes while we switch panels and welcome our next witness. This meeting is suspended for 3 minutes. now bring the meeting back into order. Welcome back. We're still on Report 6, Technology Développement Durable Canada 2024. And I'd like to welcome our witness from the House of Commons, Michel Bédard, Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel. Mr. Bédard, it's good to see you again. Thank you for coming in today. You'll be given time for an opening statement. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. As the Chair stated, my name is Michel Bédard, Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel at the House of Commons. I understand that as part of its study on the Auditor General's report on Sustainable Development Technology Canada, known as SDTC, the committee has some questions in relation to the order for the production of documents adopted by the House on June 10, 2024.
No, the order requires that the government, SDTC, the Auditor General, deposit documents regarding SDTC with me as Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel. I am then to notify the Speaker whether documents were provided as ordered. The Speaker must, in turn, inform the House accordingly. To date, I provided the Speaker with 4 reports on July 17, August 21st, September 16, and a 4th report just this morning. These reports were all tabled in the House of Commons and are publicly available as sessional papers. Je note aussi que
I note that some government institutions inform me that they still have documents to submit. The Auditor General also indicated that she may have more documents to provide later. As stated in my reports to the Speaker, some documents I received were redacted, while others were withheld. The order of June 10 also required that the documents I received be provided to the RCMP. On that, my office provided the documents to the RCMP on August 16, 2024. My role under the order is limited to receiving the documents, notifying the Speaker, and providing the documents to the RCMP. The order does not contemplate any assessment or analysis of the documents.
Members are aware. A question of privilege has been raised in the House of Commons on September 16 regarding the compliance with the order. On September 26, the Speaker ruled that the matter constituted a prima facie case of privilege. The House Leader of the official opposition, Mr. Scheer, then moved that the matter be referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. This motion is still being debated in the House of Commons. This concludes my remarks. I will be pleased to answer your questions to the extent I can under the order of June 10, and taking into consideration that the House is still currently debating this matter as a question of privilege, and whether the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs should be seized of the matter. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Bédard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bédard.
Pardon me. We'll now begin questions. I'd like to get through 2 full rounds, so just to notify members, we'll be here a few minutes late, but I don't think much beyond that. This should take about 50 minutes. So, Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our Parliamentary Law Clerk for joining us today, and appreciate your advice and guidance on these important matters when it comes to the privileges of Parliament. Before I get into my line of question, I want to step back a little bit and begin by noting that what I'm about to ask actually has no bearing on our ability to request documents, but I think to put some people's minds at ease, could you indicate to the committee what steps you have taken in your office to respond to concerns about documents being left in being provided to you in terms of security clearances of yourself and anyone else who may be in your office?
Excuse me, there was some noise, so I could not understand correctly the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, what steps have you taken in your office to protect the documents that may be provided to you, including security clearances for yourself or members of your team?
Well, first of all, the documents were produced and deposited with me as under the authority of a production order that was adopted by the House. And this constitutes the exercise of a parliamentary privilege to compel the production of documents. And this is a parliamentary privilege which, as all of the other privilege, is constitutional in nature. And that has been recognized as such by the courts. Now, our role under the order was very limited to receiving the documents and providing them to the RCMP. We made sure that we were limiting the circulation of documents, so only 2 persons in my office with top secret clearance had access to documents, myself and another counsel. That said, as they were obtained through a production order, the top clearance requirement was not a requirement per se, but we nonetheless took that step.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the clarity, too, that it isn't relevant, but it is nonetheless an extra step that you have taken in your office. I want to begin now with this morning's tabling of the recent update. Included in that report this morning was the comment that redactions were made pursuant to the Access to Information Act. Could you confirm with this committee that those redactions made pursuant to the ATIP are actually not permitted under the House order, that the House order actually supersedes and goes beyond any type of restrictions that an ATIP law may put into place?
Yeah. As you summarize it the power of the House to compel the production of documents is a constitutional power that is a parliamentary privilege. It supersedes over ordinary law, so it will prevail over the Access to Information Act, the Privacy Act, and, for example, solicitor-client privilege.
So the fact, and I don't want you to, don't want to put you in a position where you're going beyond the focus of this meeting, but it is clear that the Speaker of the House of Commons has found a prima facie question of privilege on this matter because of the failure to produce certain documents, the failure to produce unredacted documents, and to see an excuse being used that is clearly not relevant to the documents at hand, to the House order, is actually quite concerning from the standpoint of this committee and from the standpoint of Parliament as a whole. There's a phrase that's often used that Parliament is the grand inquest of the nation, and part of that importance is that we are able to compel the production of papers, the production of documents, and the requirement of witnesses to appear before this House. So from a constitutional standpoint, from a standpoint of the grand inquest of the nation, can you explain to this House why it's important those privileges, those important rights of Parliament be maintained for us to fulfill our duties as parliamentarians?
It goes to the very raison d'être, or reason for parliamentary privilege, that the House of Commons, Parliament in general, have the autonomy it requires to perform its functions, to hold the government accountable, to legislate, to deliberate. So that's the root for all parliamentary privilege. And as part of its function to investigate and hold the government accountable, if a committee or the House require documents, it can order the production of these documents.
And can you confirm that applies whether it's a committee has the same power to compel the production of documents as the House of Commons itself?
The privilege belongs to the House of Commons. It's delegated through the standing orders to committee. If there is a breach of this privilege, committees cannot themselves impose sanctions. They have to report the matter to the House.
We're still there with committees to do that, but we would have to go through the House to impose sanctions. Going down that route, what are the available sanctions that are available to committees or to the House as a whole, or for committees to recommend to the House as a whole for the sanctions to hold those who may not be complying with production orders accountable for their failure to do so?
There are various sanctions available. If we referring to some recent examples, we've seen recently a witness at the bar of the House being admonished by the Speaker. That's one sanction. In 2011, for example, another sanction was that the House of Commons remove its confidence in the government because they had not provided all the documents. So those are two examples of sanctions that are at each extreme of the spectrum.
Thank you very much. Moving to our next member, Mr. Erskine Smith, you have the floor for 5 minutes, or pardon, for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. So I am entirely supportive of the idea that Parliament reigns supreme in demanding documents. I've sat on committee where we worked alongside Parliament in the UK, actually, to pursue a Canadian company, AIQ, which was a smaller player in the scandal around Cambridge Analytica. And as the UK was dealing with that fallout, we were dealing with a smaller amount of that fallout. We worked hand in hand to make sure that documents were properly disclosed, witnesses were compelled to testify, and we were able to work collaboratively as parliamentary committees, pursuing parliamentary investigations. At the same time, with such significant power, in this particular case, I'm at a bit of a loss because one has to use that power responsibly. And we've got a situation, and this is where I would welcome your thoughts. We have a situation where the former law clerk, Rob Walsh, has called this an abuse of the House's powers. And he says it's an abuse because the purpose of the House's powers is to enable the House to carry on its proceedings. How do you respond to that? What do you make of that?
As I indicated in an answer to a previous question, the root of and the reason for parliamentary privilege is to allow Parliament, the House of Commons, committees to perform their functions, deliberative, investigation, legislating, without any interference from outside, be it the executive or the judiciary. The order of June 10 has two components. First, there is the component that documents have to be provided to me as law clerk, and then the second component is that they be made available to the RCMP. It doesn't go further than that. If you look at the order, that's the only thing that there is in the order. Now, what the RCMP could do with the documents potentially could.
But pause that. I want to get to there. I actually just want to deal with the powers of the House, because you've got a law clerk, Rob Walsh, saying it's an abuse. And he says because the purpose of the House's powers is to enable the House to carry on its proceedings. And he's saying that the active intent to request documents for the sole purpose of turning those documents over to a third party is inconsistent with the power of the House, because the power of the House is to enable the House to carry on its own proceedings, not to simply pass that work on to a third party. What do you make of that?
As I indicated in my remarks at the beginning of my testimony, I need to be mindful that there is a question privilege right now before the House of Commons that has been debated for 2 weeks, and that the matter could be referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs as a question privilege. Now, in the assessment of the question of privilege, if the matter is ever referred to the committee, it could look at the fact that the order is indeed unprecedented and unusual. Now, if you look at the order, because there has been many things said about this order, but one needs to look at the text of the order and the paragraph of the order. It does not require the RCMP to do anything with the documents.
But it doesn't need to. And I want to get to what the RCMP could and should and could do, not even should do, could do, because how would these documents be able to be used in any investigation? You've got the RCMP commissioner saying the RCMP's ability to receive and use information obtained through this production order and under the compulsory powers afforded by the Auditor General Act and in the course of a criminal investigation could give rise to concerns under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is therefore highly unlikely that any information obtained by the RCMP under the motion where privacy interests exist could be used to support a criminal prosecution or further criminal investigation. So if I'm defense counsel and there's been no search warrant approved on reasonable grounds here, my client's charter rights will have been circumvented, no?
I think that even before getting to the protection under the charter rights, one needs to look at the issue as a question of parliamentary law and whether these documents would be admissible in a court of law as documents that have been obtained under the authority of a House order that are directly and closely connected to parliamentary proceedings. Also, Parliament needs to, and the House and committees need to consider the potential impact of such an order. Witnesses come to committees and testify, and they're told that they have immunity while testifying. It will destroy the root of the privilege itself if testimony of documents produced were, as a matter of principle, referred to the RCMP once the evidence has been given. That will
I understand that. I understand that, but let's deal with the charter question as well, because in what world, you're a lawyer, in what world could this evidence be admissible, given it was not subject to search warrant on reasonable grounds? In what world? My former colleagues at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association are going to point a laugh at this. In what world could this ever be used? Because it's a clear violation of one's charter rights.
As I indicated at the beginning, my role under the order was not to proceed to analysis of the document or an evaluation of the documents. I had to receive the documents and make them available to the RCMP. In doing this, and I also had to report to the House whether or not the order had been complied with. So I did look at the documents to assess whether or not there was any redactions. I did not read the documents, just had to look, just to make sure that I could inform the Speaker whether redactions had been made or not. In conducting this role, I was able to see that some documents were documents that would have been publicly available. Other documents are, in my opinion, would not necessarily raise a charter issues. That said, there is indeed, and I think that the RCMP and the Auditor General has expressed concerns, and other lawyers, and I concur with these concerns, that there might be potentially charter issues because there might be expectation of privacy in certain documents, and they have been obtained without any search warrant or production order. That said, before we get to the charter rights, Parliament needs to look at this order and its compliance or its rights under the parliamentary law to obtain documents.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Séguin-Desgagnés pour 6 minutes.
Next, you have 6 minutes. Ms. Séguin-Desgagnés. Good morning, or hello, Mr. Bédard. Pleased to see you here at committee. Briefly, you said that you reported to the Speaker this morning and you'll give us an idea of the documents you've received and those we still haven't received. Also, those that were redacted or that had missing pages from certain departments in particular. Could you give us a quick update? Well, so far I've reported 4 times to the Speaker, and they were all tabled as House documents or sessional papers. As you know, my first report in July was the most substantive because it was the first one, and the subsequent ones have been updates, essentially. If I can give you a quick update, so far I have 8 government entities that provided documents with no redactions, 2 that have provided some with redactions. In terms of SDTC, I have received documents. Some were withheld. Others were redacted also. What were the reasons given by SDTC and the government entities that redacted some of the documents? What were the reasons that were given? Essentially, the redactions was based on the Access to Information Act, so they treated the request as an ATIP request. Is it just names, numbers, phone numbers, or is it more than that that was redacted? Is it entire pages, entire sections from contracts, emails? Could you tell us a little bit more on that? Well, under the House order, I received the documents and then I informed the Speaker of that. I do not have the mandate to take a detailed look and to provide reports on the nature of the redactions. If the question is accepted as a question of privilege in the House and sent back and referred to the Committee of House Affairs, then that would be a different issue, and that would be a legitimate question for the committee to look at. Now, in terms of this, or of the documents I've received, they are all annexed to my report to the Speaker. I have not given a percentage of the redacted information, for example, names and numbers, other ATIP-related information and client counsel privilege. Thank you. Now, can you tell us about the entities that provided documents and responded, but that were redacted, the documents that is? I think you mentioned some in your opening remarks to the chair, or rather to the speaker. Apart from SDTC, there are others that you've mentioned? Well, listen, I hesitate to give you a list of government entities that redacted their documents more or less. My role under the order was to provide the information to the speaker so that he could inform the House. Once we received documents from an entity, we ensured that there was no redactions, or whether or not there were redactions. We had to look through all the documents to make sure there was nothing redacted. But as soon as we found information redacted in a document provided by an entity, we put it in the documents with the redactions category. So I couldn't really give you a list of those that had more or less redacted the documents. I think that would go into the substance of the order and of the question of privilege. And that's something that's being debated at the House and could be referred to the Committee on Procedures and House Affairs. Now, in terms of question of privilege, could you tell us, could you remind the committee of the issue? You mentioned it at the beginning, it's important, the constitutional issue, and again, it's a bit ironic when it's members of the Bloc Québécois who have to go back to the Constitution, but the primacy of a parliament, the right of parliamentarians and of Parliament to order the production of documents. What's problematic for the government at the moment is that those documents have to be provided to the RCMP, but first they have to be provided to you, to the law clerk of the House of Commons, to then be put through different steps, whether we agree on them or not. The House has the right to order the production of the documents. Can you please remind us? I think that's important to know that under the Parliament Act, the Parliament has the right to ask the documents of, or various documents of law clerk. Yes, it's part of Section 18 of the Constitution of 1867. And it's also in the Parliament Act. The government, or the House rather, has the right to order the production of documents. In the past, we have seen examples of that. Documents that were provided to the law clerk and parliamentary counsel to then be provided to the House. Thank you.
The floor for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Monsieur Bedard, for being here with us today. I'm going to, I think, go back to some of the lines of questioning that Mr. Erskine-Smith was following. And just, I'm new to this committee, and I'm trying to grasp what the bounds of these powers are. In your letter, you said that the power to send for documents is absolute and unfettered. In my experience in the House of Commons here, when we ask for documents for a committee, they often come redacted. Sometimes I think we call for you or other law clerks to come and explain why they're redacted. Is there any when it's unfettered, I mean, does that mean we could ask for all the documents from the cabinet, for instance? What about state secrets? It seems very broad, and I'm just wondering what are those bounds, and if there are no bounds, what are the procedures in place to deal with these documents when they're deposited with the House to make sure that sensitive information is treated properly?
Thank you for the question. As other parliamentary privilege that belongs to the House and Parliament, the House of Commons, as the exclusive authority in the exercise of these privilege. So it's Parliament to decide whether or not to exercise its privilege in any given case. Now, you refer to the fact that you've seen documents in the past provided to other committees that were redacted. It is not unusual for either committees to contemplate or to authorize redactions when they order the production of documents. Also, even when there's no such mention in the production order, we will see witnesses or third parties participating in proceedings of committees providing the documents with redactions. Once it receives documents with redactions, now it's for the committee to decide whether or not it wants to pursue the matter further. Sometimes the redactions could, on their face, be minimal, that one could tell that only the phone number were taken away or redacted. But if there are important portions that are redacted, or if for any other reason the committee wants to insist on the production of documents totally unredacted, it can insist on its order. And that's oftentimes where we at the Office of the Law Clerk can assist committees and explain to witnesses the power of the committees to send for records and papers that are absolute and unfettered. If after insistence the documents are still produced with the redactions, now it's for the committee to decide whether or not it wants to leave the matter as it is or report to the House. And if it reports the matter to the House, the matter could still be raised as a question privilege. Now, in the past, there have been instances where very sensitive documents were subject of production order. And the case two cases I could refer is the Winnipeg Lab documents. The government were claiming that certain documents were protected under national security, and same thing for the Afghan papers documents a decade or so ago. In that specific circumstances, Parliament, the opposition working with government, found a compromise so that some members could have access to the documents without compromising the security and sensitive nature of the documents.
You've got about 90 seconds.
90 seconds, okay. I'm going to go on now to this issue around documents being sent on to the RCMP. Mr. Erskine-Smith mentioned this, and the witness we had, the Ethics Commissioner, mentioned this as well earlier this morning. Is this a case of, if the House of Commons has asked for these documents for this purpose, it's, whether that would be a mistake to send them on to the RCMP is of no consequence to you or to others. In terms of legal terms, that's what you've been ordered to do, so you do that. You don't take into account what that might do to subsequent legal actions, because we've heard from various people who seem to know their stuff that this might not be the best course of action, and yet this is what the House has asked for. So is there any legal reason to say we shouldn't do this, or you just say this is what I've been told to do?
Well, in terms of the instruction in the order, it was very clear and ambiguous that I were to receive the documents and make them available to the RCMP. So I did comply with the order, and since the first batch of documents I provided with the RCMP, they have been also made aware that there are other documents that are available for them if they want to pick them up. Now, the power of the House to order production of documents is one thing. The RCMP or any other outside body using parliamentary proceedings for their own purpose is another. I echo the concern that had been expressed in relation to the Charter, and also raise the fact that as a matter of parliamentary law, these documents were produced under a production order. They're closely connected to parliamentary proceedings, and proceedings are not admitted as evidence in a court of law. There's also the possible It could discourage witnesses and other parties eventually, if they're asked to produce documents by committees or the House, to produce them if they are concerned that these documents could be referred to later on to the RCMP.
Thank you. That is the time. Beginning our second round, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bedard, for confirming that SDTC continues to withhold documents as well as having submitted documents that they have redacted. Therefore, SDTC continues not to be in compliance with the order of the House. There are other government entities that have not followed the order of the House, including the Justice Department. As of the summer, 11,517 pages of documents concerning SDTC have been withheld by the Department of Justice. Is that the case today?
That's I haven't received further documents from the Justice Department that they had not provided earlier because they had been redacted or withheld.
So, okay, thank you for that. That's a lot of documents that have been withheld by the Department of Justice. What about ISET? Are there documents that are outstanding from ISET or the Department of Industry?
I still have to receive documents from ISET, indeed. Yes.
And do you have any idea how many documents you're awaiting from the Department of Industry?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question? I misheard.
Approximately how many documents are missing?
Until I receive the documents, I have no idea as
fair,
to...
Fair enough. Now, documents that the Department of Industry has submitted have been redacted, some of those documents. Is that correct?
Correct.
And others have been withheld?
There have been government entities that have provided documents with redactions or that they have withheld, yes.
And that includes the Department of Industry on the point of withholding documents?
In relation to each department, I will rather prefer...
Okay. And the basis upon which the Department of Industry is withholding or rather redacting documents is on the basis of the Privacy Act?
I will have to check for a specific case. It's all in my reports. And it's either the grounds for redactions or for having withheld documents. It's always Access to Information Act, Privacy Act, solicitor-client privilege.
And you have confirmed that the House order supersedes all of those bases, correct?
That's correct. And the House order, contrary to some orders in the past, does not contemplate any redactions to be made to the documents.
And what about cabinet confidence? Has that been asserted at any point?
Yes, that has been asserted, and that's also a ground in the Access to Information Act.
Okay.
So when I refer to the Access to Information Act, that also included cabinet confidences.
And so would it be accurate to say that the Department of Industry has asserted it on the basis of cabinet confidence the minister has?
Again, I'm reluctant to comment on any specific department in particular, but generally, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And would it be fair to say that ministers of the Crown are ultimately accountable to Parliament with regards to compliance by their department with respect to any order of the House?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think, thank you for that, Mr. Bedard, because what we have is a Minister of Industry who claims that he is interested in getting to the bottom of corruption at SDTC. And yet, contrary to what the minister has asserted, Minister Champagne, what you have confirmed, Mr. Bedard, is that he has invoked cabinet confidence to protect himself surrounding issues of corruption at SDTC and is running interference, blocking the production of documents and obstructing a parliamentary order, an order that is specifically designed to get to the bottom of corruption at SDTC. The minister is doing exactly the opposite of what he asserted. It begs the question, what is he hiding? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Up next is Ms. Khalid. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Monsieur Badat, for being here today. I really appreciate the soliloquy of my colleague there, none of which is true, but I do have some quotes from people that I just want to run by you. Senior Parliamentary Counsel to the House of Commons, Monsieur Stephen Chaplin, stated that the June 10th order was both completely unprecedented and a likely abuse of parliamentary powers. He said that the House of Commons was simply acting as a mailbox for the police force, which is not one of its duties. He also stated that it is not a parliamentary or constitutional function of Parliament to help the police. In the same vein, former RCMP Deputy Commissioner Pierre-Yves Bourgeois also commented that we all know that the rule of law is predicated upon a separation between what Parliament is doing and the law enforcement agencies, in this case the RCMP. Would you agree with those statements?
Under the, I mentioned earlier parliamentary privilege, and the reason for parliamentary privilege is to allow the House and its
Perhaps let me
committees
rephrase that a little bit. Do you share the same sentiments that are being conveyed by these two very senior people within our institutions?
I could answer the question to the best I can, because you refer to documents that express opinions, and I can offer my opinions to the committee if it's the will of the member, respecting the issues you have raised. Okay. The parliamentary privilege, be it the power to send for records and papers, to compel production of documents, the power to send for witnesses, exists to support the function of the House as the grand inquest of the nation, and the investigation power function of the House of Commons and its committees. Other parliamentary privilege exists so to protect the House and its members from outside interference. And parliamentary privilege does not indeed exist so that the House can assist outside powers, be it the judiciary or police forces, to conduct their functions. And as I stated, as a matter of parliamentary law, when witnesses testify before a committee or when documents are produced, be it submissions or documents, there are immunity protecting the witnesses, and these proceedings will not be admissible before a court of law. Traditionally, there's always a separation between various powers in Canada, and I think that this very committee has set the golden standard about 20 years ago when, during the sponsorship scandal, there were one witness that was called upon to testify before the committee, while there was also a police investigation of the same person. And the committee, so to not interfere with the police investigation, decided to have the meeting in camera for the very reason not to interfere with the police interference, and kept those proceedings in camera for a number of years so that not to interfere with the investigation.
And thank you for that. Now, I believe it was Mr. Chaplin who also said that he believed that the House had overstepped here and that it raised a number of constitutional issues. And I know that you spoke about this a little bit earlier, but I would like you to talk a little bit more about what are the constitutional implications of this unprecedented move that has happened by the opposition in Parliament.
Without suggesting that I agree with the comment or the blog that you have just referred to, I alluded earlier to certain issues that had been raised. There has been charter issues that have been raised by the RCMP as well as the Auditor General. I earlier during this testimony raised that as a matter of parliamentary law, it's doubtful that these documents could be used as evidence before courts of law.
And, you know, we've seen a lot of influence with misinformation, disinformation, and its impact on our democratic institutions. How do you think this kind of a political move impacts our core democratic institutions and the separation and the rule of law in how we conduct ourselves and maintain free and fair democracy here in Canada?
I won't reply answer to the general question because it invites House officer and we're impartial, nonpartisan, non-political. But I mentioned earlier that the parliamentary privilege are members and they belong to the House, committees, and all members. So it's for the members to assess how they want to exercise those privileges. They're currently question privilege being debated before the House of Commons, and that the motion is to refer the matter to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, and that will provide the appropriate forum to discuss those issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés.
Next is Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To follow up on what we were talking about earlier, you started telling us a little bit more about the Parliament Act, which provided the powers to the House to impose a production order. Could you tell us about the order, rather the procedure when you receive a document pursuant to an order from the House of Commons? What can happen with those documents afterwards in different scenarios that we might see in future also? Well, in terms of the order per se, there's no precedent where the House orders the production of documents and in the same order states that it's to provide them to the police forces. I think there could be different scenarios. If we go simply by the wording of the order, I know there's an ongoing debate at the House and also in the public domain, which is completely legitimate. Nothing would prevent another order to be made to require that the RCMP commissioner appear to talk about the documents and so on. And all of that would be in a parliamentary context. As I said earlier, if these documents are to be used by the RCMP in an investigation and then, well, come back to Parliament, not the RCMP, in committees and so on, how could we use these documents? Well, the documents at this time are there. If we're limited to the parliamentary side, they exist only in my office, accessed only by a couple of people. They were not tabled before the House. The Official Languages Act or the House of Commons rules did not apply, so I have the documents in only one language, which is fine under the law. The documents to be provided to, or that are provided to the RCMP, are only in one language. If they were to be tabled in a committee or put to another use, they would have to be translated because most committees have a routine requirement that documents be translated. Also, as I received an order from the House, my hands are tied rather, and I can only distribute the documents or do whatever else with the documents. I can only do that in line with the order. I have the documents under order from the House, so I cannot simply just provide documents here or there. The committees are creatures of the House, as we say, but if the House referred the issue to the committee, for example, Procedures and House Affairs, then the committee would get an idea of the documents to be able to conduct its own analysis. Thank you.
Floor for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And again, I'd like to try to figure out what the bounds to these powers are. You said in your letter that when we ask for production of documents, that is a privilege that's unfettered and unbounded, that, it goes above, in a sense, the House of Commons is above the laws that it creates for the rest of the country. I'm just wondering, are there laws that that do bound those privileges? Are there any laws? Just maybe answer that, and then I'll just finish with a different tact.
In terms of laws that will limit the privilege of the House to send for records and paper, there's no explicit law that diminish or limit this power, and as the privilege is constitutional in nature. It's not, the parliamentary privilege is not amended or modified by implication or indirectly. There needs to be an explicit provision in the law that will override the privilege. And there are some privilege, the privilege of freedom of speech, for example, that there are some limitations that have been created, but those limitations are very explicit, and there are none in relation to this power. Now, the law of parliamentary privilege will know of some circumstances where it do not apply. So, for example, the House could not compel the production of Senate documents, or the Senate could not compel the production of House documents. But these are exceptions that arise from the law of parliamentary privilege and not any acts of Parliament.
So there are restrictions within Parliament, but not between Parliament and the rest of the world.
And also in terms of restrictions within Parliament, there's always the restrictions that the House or committees will self-impose on themselves. There are, as indicated, and you referred to examples earlier, documents that are provided with redaction. It's up for each committee on a case-by-case basis to decide whether or not they want to accept the redactions that have been made, and whether to insist on some and not on others, and if they're still dissatisfied, to report to the House.
Thank you. Thank you. That is the time. Did you have one more? Is it a brief question, Mr.
No,
Kennedy?
it wasn't a brief question.
All right, very good. Thank you. Then I appreciate your candor. Turn now to Mr. Stewart. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bedard, for being here today. Finance, industry, and BDC are all sending in redacted documents. These are key departments up for public discussion here with certain hearings, many motions. These are departments that are being present at our standing committees on a very regular basis. Are they complying with the House order when they redact?
The June 10 order did not contemplate any redactions, and had the House wished for any redaction, it would have been stated so explicitly. And I think that was the substance of the Speaker's ruling, that the matter constituted a prima facie case of privilege. So yeah, the answer is no, that there was no compliance.
Okay. What about cabinet confidences? At times, they're being redacted as well. How do you feel about that? Are there any rules being broken there? Can you explain that process of?
In terms of
just in generalities,
yes,
just in general, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the power to order the production of documents, as I indicated, this power is absolute. Now, when a document is ordered, there might be a legitimate privacy or other legitimate concerns not to provide the document in full. And if there are redactions, it's ready for the House or committees to decide on that. They accept the reason that were put forward not to see the information. And if the House or committees are still unhappy with the reason put forward, they can take further measures. It could be from ordering a representative to appear at the bar in the House, or as we've seen in 2011, withdrawing the confidence in government.
Sure. Thank you for that. As you know, Parliament is not bound by the Privacy Act, has a right to have any documents laid before it, which it believes are necessary. This power is absolute. As the Liberal chair of the committee, this very committee ruled in 2009. On the ArriveCan investigation, as an example, in an email discussing an OGO motion, the CBSA talks about redacting and withholding based upon, and I quote, spirit of the ATIP Act. Could you explain, is that allowed? Can you explain that process and how that would be allowed for them to redact and withhold based on spirit of the ATIP Act?
Well, generally, the power to send for records is unfettered. So if the committee requests unredacted documents, it is entitled to unredacted documents. And the Access to Information Act, Privacy Act, or any other act will not apply. Neither the spirit of the act. If redactions are proposed, it's up for each committee to decide whether or not they are accepting the redactions.
Okay. Is Parliament not supreme when ordering documents, or is CBSA allowed to deny the will of the committee?
The power to send for records and paper for Parliament is absolute. So yes, if the House or one of its committee is ordering the production of documents, it is entitled to it.
Okay, I appreciate that. I have no further questions. Mike, do you want to take the rest, or do we? Pretty much 5, is it, John?
All right, very good. Any other questions then?
Thank
Doesn't
you.
sound like it. I will turn then back to Mr. Erskine Smith. You have the last 5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I wouldn't mind, given we're at the end of this, recapping just a little bit. So you've called this an unprecedented and unusual order today. That's right?
That's correct, and that's how the Speaker in his ruling qualified the order.
Okay, and now the Auditor General has said that there's nothing criminal here to warrant referring the matter to the RCMP. Just earlier today, before your testimony, the Ethics Commissioner said exactly the same thing. The Auditor General has expressed concerns with the order. The RCMP has expressed concerns with the order as well. You're aware of those concerns, yes?
Yes.
So now you've got the former Law Clerk Rob Walsh, as well as former Senior Parliamentary Counsel Steve Chaplin. They've called the order an abuse or likely abuse of the House's powers. And you said here, and I just want to be clear in response to Ms. Calla's questions, you said that Parliament's function, the function for which its powers exist, is not to serve a third party's investigation. That's right? Okay, now you've also said that the gold standard to respect our separation of powers as a country was when this committee went in camera to avoid interfering with an RCMP investigation. That's right?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You've said that the gold standard, you used the language of gold standard to respect the separation of powers, was when this committee, 20 years ago, went in camera to avoid interfering with a police investigation. That's right?
That's correct.
And here we are doing the exact opposite of that gold standard. And wait for it, because after all of that, the RCMP is unlikely to even be able to use the underlying information because absent a search warrant issued on reasonable grounds, the use of that information would obviously violate an accused's charter rights. So what precedent are we setting here? Where does this end?
I mean, in terms of the order, and in answering to Ms. Sinclair-Desgagne's question, there might still be a use related to parliamentary proceedings with the documents that were produced, but that will require subsequent order from the House. If the intent is to have the documents used as part of an investigation of the RCMP or as part of as evidence before a court of law, it's at odds with parliamentary law.
Okay, well, let's imagine other scenarios, because once upon a time, you had a Harper government that was going after environmental charities. So let's say that Parliament, a majority-led Conservative Parliament, is so angry about that issue and so vindictive that they decide that they're going to order the disclosure of every single document email from an environmental charity. Parliament reigns supreme, right?
The parliamentary privilege to order the production of documents is an exercise of privilege, is absolute and unfettered. Yeah. Now, once that has been exercised, the use of proceedings is by the parliamentary law subject to restrictions and limitations.
Understood. Absolute and unfettered. But absolute and unfettered, we ourselves should possibly subject ourselves to some reasonable framework with which we should operate under, because you could imagine a request for documents in any number of instances. You could imagine a number of unreasonable requests, including this one, where you are demanding such documentary disclosure in the face of the Auditor General's concerns, in the face of the RCMP's concerns, in the face of lawyers' concerns to say this is improper, in the face of former parliamentary counsel saying this is an abuse of power. We still have that power, and if we're willing to use it in this case, when are we not willing to use it? Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Drouin, do you have it? Oh, I wasn't sure. All right, just wanted to be sure. Didn't want to leave any time on the table. So, Mr. Drouin, I want to thank you very much for your testimony and participation in relation to the study of Report 6. Il n'y a pas d'informations à soumettre. Alors, merci beaucoup encore.
There's no information to submit. Thank you again.
Wednesday. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Have a good day.